Okay, we are streaming. Give me a second to put it into board docs, and I know we're waiting for a few more board members. I will text because we do need a quorum to go into executive session.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Oh, wait, I think I've seen most of you already last Tuesday. Been
It's
a while.
okay. Happy New Year. It's always good. Happy New Year. It's only 9 days in. I was in a meeting and someone's like 9 days in and it feels like it's 30 days in.
3, 4, 5. We do have quorum. I the first item though is Mr. Walker presenting. Have you heard from him?
Start with strategic priorities, if that's okay.
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 Yep, so the link is in board docs, so feel free to start whenever you're ready.
Great, thank you. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the January 9th, 2025 Committee of the Whole, Hartford Board of Education. We're grateful for you for joining us tonight, and thank you to the board members and staff of Hartford Public Schools for joining us tonight. Tonight, we will be discussing strategic priorities for the upcoming legislative session. We may have an teacher advisory council discussion proposal. We may table that, but we'll see. And then we have an executive session regarding filling the vacancy, our board member vacancy. So with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Torres Rodriguez to talk through strategic priorities.
Yes, and if you give me 1 minute, I'm trying to pull up my document.
Okay, let me put the document up, and this is Mr. Foster, I believe, is
Thank you. I
the
can
lead
do
on
it
this one.
over. And I also think if
Deputy Foster.
chairperson, if we could give just a quick reminder overview of process for community.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you, Superintendent. So the board called a task force. So we have a legislative and advocacy task force that is currently meeting a couple times a month just to discuss possible priorities for the upcoming legislative session, or I guess the current ongoing legislative session that started yesterday. And we are a group of folks that are really just coming together with the goal to improve the schools. So there are teachers union, the Teamsters Union. My apologies to those. I'm not sure what they're called, but that it's not the Teamsters Union. My apologies, John Walton, if you're listening in. But the union led by John. We are grateful for them being a part of our conversations. We have our lobbyists from Capital Strategies alongside of us. We have parents, we have educators, we have community members. So just a group. All of our meetings have been live streamed, so you may watch those online. And the goal is really that the priorities that come out of our group, as well as other groups, that we come together and just help each other push things through legislation, or at least bring them up, right, so that we can continue to talk about them. So with that, Superintendent, I will turn, to Mr. Foster.
Yeah, Deputy Foster will do the big buckets, and then I'll speak to some of the smaller items that we discussed, just so that I can give additional context and background.
Great, thank you. Can you hear me okay? Great. Okay, so I will talk about the first 4 items that you see in front of you, which are, we started by looking at a larger list of kind of potential things that we might want to advocate for. And I think over the course of those meetings that Board Chair Hockenhall was describing, we sort of narrowed in. And again, as Chair Hockenhall said, we worked with our lobbyists to understand, what other organizations are advocating for that we could align ourselves, who we could align with. And so that's how we got to this kind of shorter list. And so really, I want to highlight that there really are two different buckets here. So the first two are really new policy and new funding. So these are asks. These are asks of the legislature, asks of the state that require an affirmative action of the state. And the first is to fully fund the special education excess cost grant at 100%. So just to refresh, and also for the viewing audience, the special education cost grant is a longstanding grant in Connecticut where if the individual cost or the cost for an individual student who has a disability exceeds 4.5 times our average per pupil expense as a district, then the state gives a grant that is intended to pay all of the costs above 4.5 times. And so for us, 4.5 times is about $100,000. So if the costs for an individual student exceed $100,000, the grant is meant to cover the amount above that. Historically, though, that grant has always been subject to appropriation. And so when the amount is appropriated through the budget process, the amount that every district in Connecticut receives is usually essentially a prorated percentage based on the amount of funding available. So, if it would take $10 million to fully fund, or that's too small a number, but if it took $50 million to fully fund the excess cost grant for the entire state, but only $40 million is appropriated, then the State Department of Education does a formula to figure out, well, what percentage are we going to get? So, for example, last year in Hartford, we received about 76% of the amount. And so what this particular policy ask is that it be funded at 100% so that the grant would cover 100% of the costs above 4.5 times for individual students whose costs exceed that 4.5 times threshold. So that's our first ask. Our second is introducing a special education factor to the ECS formula. So the ECS formula is essentially the way in which we are funding. It's the funding equalization formula in Connecticut that funds all school districts, and the amount you get is really a function of how much each municipality can afford on their own. And Connecticut is one of, I think we've talked about this before, but again, for the viewing public, Connecticut is one of 3 states in the United States that does not have a factor for special education students in the formula. And so when I say they don't have a factor, what I mean by that is when the state determines how much money they're going to provide to each district in Connecticut to support education, they give a certain amount for every student. Now, for students who are multilingual learners, they provide a higher amount. For students who are coming from poverty, they also provide a higher amount. But they don't provide a higher amount for students with disabilities. So the amount we receive in ECS for our students with disabilities is the same as we receive for a general education student. And I think the excess cost grant that I just talked about was meant to help with that. But keep in mind, we don't get any support for the excess cost from the excess cost grant until the individual cost of a single student exceeds $100,000. So that's our second ask. And we don't know, it's hard to, there's nothing in the right-hand column in terms of how much money that would yield, because it would depend very much on what particular factor, what the dollar amount per student was, right? How that was operationalized. But that's something, we've talked many times in our finance committee meetings about the fact that our fiscal challenges are heavily driven by the rapid rate of increase in the cost of meeting the needs of our highest need students, our students with disabilities. And we want to serve those students in every way that they deserve. But not having any accounting within the state funding formula for the need of those students is challenging. So that's what the ask is there. The next two are really, we're advocating to sustain existing policy. So this is not asking the legislature to do something new. This is asking the legislature not to undo something they already did. So the first one, it says sustain the 58% cap on general education magnet tuition. That was put in 2 sessions ago. And it essentially says that magnet operators can't charge general ed tuition to sending districts above 58% of what they charged in the previous fiscal year. And there's been talk at various points about, is that going to be permanent or is that going to be repealed? So our position and our advocacy should be sustaining that 58% cap. And the last one then is there was a plan to phase in additional funding as part of the ECS formula over a period of years. A couple of years ago, the legislature made the decision to accelerate that phase in so that the final year of the phase in would be fiscal year 26, so next year. And this is just advocating to sustain that. And so that is currently the intention, I believe, in the policy. So our advocacy position is we want to advocate to ensure that ECS is fully funded in fiscal year 26. So those are the four big, right, again, two new, two sustaining existing policy. And then I think the superintendent wanted to talk about there are potentially other asks we could make, and we've talked about some of those in our legislative group that the board chair spoke of, that there may be some other asks of more discrete pieces that could be supportive to the Hartford Public Schools.
Thanks, Deputy Foster. And I just wanted to add context. These are asks that might be Hartford specific and or specific to communities with like needs that might entail funding streams that are not necessarily connected to special education excess cost or ECS increases. I'll give some examples, and these examples that I'm sharing are mostly things that we are doing now, and we are seeing recurring trends in the feedback from the strategic planning process that we've heard from variety of groups. Example, wraparound supports, mental health supports for students. And so one way that we know we get at that is through our full service community school model, which right now, right, it's about $1.5 to $2 million for the schools that we currently have. Could there be an opportunity for an ask for much smaller dollars to allow us to continue some of the work, some of the supports and services for students, and or to expand? Another one is Ready CT, right? And the cost that we had been paying with COVID funding that the city is actually helping us with this year around our career pathways that we continue to hear from students that matter and deserve expansion. There are others that we've talked about in some of our committee meetings relative to specific staffing recruitment strategies. I know that there was conversation in the governor's commentary around educators and pipelines and strengthening those. And so could there be an opportunity there to allow for a Hartford specific or an Alliance district specific pilot, for example, and specifically targeting our special education needs, knowing that, yes, we have a contract that's going to be in place for next year for our educators, but is there an opportunity to do a little bit more to not just recruit, retain, support while we expand programming for students in district? So those are some of the ideas that might be a one-off or multi-year ask, and perhaps the state could identify additional funding streams that might or might not come directly to Hartford, right? A funding for community schools could potentially come in via another agency, if you will. So as part strategy on identifying other ways, and then obviously strategic in alignment with current programming and what we heard over and over and over again as to the needs and what our community feels we need to focus on.
Thank you, Superintendent and Deputy Foster. It was very helpful. And just as a caveat too, so these are what we've talked about in the Legislative and Advocacy Task Force. There may be others. This is something that might change going down, down the road as we continue talking. It will likely evolve. Things may be added. So this is it is a start, and we will continue to meet as the weeks and months go on. So with that, are there any questions from board members? Seeing none. All right. Oh, sorry. Mr. Walker?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. My only feedback is with the superintendent's comments. I would like to maybe see that in writing or something. I just got a little lost in all your comments. I thought they were good stuff. Just what's in front of me now in writing, it helps me really process it and understand the rationale for it. So that's all. Just a future, if there's an opportunity to document some of that, that'd be good.
And I think through you, Chairperson, once they are solidified as actual recommendations, they will be codified in a document that we will be also sharing, Board Member Walker.
Ms. Fortune?
Regarding the 4.5 times factor for the special education funding, is there an opportunity to also approach this necessarily not as the 4.5 times factor, but as a percentage of overall students within a district who are marked as special needs students, right? So that way, right, a district that has maybe 10 out of 1,000 students who are special needs probably can't deal with a 4.5 factor because the remaining funding is sufficient. But when you have a district with a disproportionately larger body of special needs students, that factor, that's when you really sort of, start to drown and you're losing a lot of money.
I mean, I can speak to that. We certainly could. I mean, we did talk some about other ways of approaching and advocating around the excess cost. We didn't talk about that one specifically, and I think we could look at that as an option of what certainly from the state's perspective, that would be somewhat lower cost, right? If they're differentiating somewhat, so there's more support where the need is highest. The one other one we did talk about is the 4.5 times, right? We did talk about why 4.5 times, right? How would it be different if it was, the state picking up the cost above 3 times the average per pupil, and 3 is arbitrary. I just picking that out of the air. So that's the one we did talk about as another area we could advocate. I think what I would say is in consultation with our lobbyists, I think we were going back and forth weighing the sort of likelihood, the value to the district of particular moves against the likelihood of passage. And certainly of the ones you see listed on the screen, in terms of the 2 that are new, fully funding the excess cost at the 4.5 times, it might be one of the more likely because it's a smaller dollar impact than some of the others. But we could certainly take a look at, try to sort of cost out what it would mean if we looked at it some different ways.
No, I mean, it makes sense. If you think what you have ultimately will yield better results, it makes sense. It just also crossed my mind, the potentially another way to approach it or probably combine both approaches. But it's
I can say that, I mean, we did, in terms of the costing, I'll just add one more thing that we took a look and certainly lowering that threshold from 4.5 times to something lower would yield significantly more support for the schools, more than just fully funding at 100%.
Great, thank you. Any other questions? All right, seeing none, thank you, Superintendent. Thank you, Deputy Foster. We will go back to item 1.1, the Teachers Advisory Council. Mr. Walker, I believe, is going to present to us, and just wanted to say the reason that we're bringing this here to tonight's meeting. Mr. Walker will go through a proposal to start an advisory council. And then, so tonight is a primer to kind of share the information, and then we'll further discuss it in the policy committee in early February. It belongs, go back and forth on what it belongs in, but since it would require a change in the bylaws, we thought having further conversation in the policy committee made the most sense. So that will further continue the conversation in February. So with that, Mr. Walker, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I don't have pretty pictures. I will own, I have a cold, so my voice is a little raspy. beyond this evening, I will definitely do PowerPoints in the future because no one wants to um, to look at a lot of verbiage on screen. But um, was that Christina? Were you pulling up the presentation? Um, Let me at least walk through it, excuse me, as best I can. Um, the and I'm gonna you can leave it, yeah, just like that. So the um, the idea is um, the board being able to leverage input from instructional staff at school-based level to get feedback on educational processes, what's happening in the on the operation side of the district. I see the district is having obviously an administrative component with central office and all that they perform, and then you have the schools that actually form the operations side of the district. It's where the actual value that we create is delivered, right? So all the educational services are delivered through the schools and through the instructional staff. And one of the things that I think that would um, inform the board better is to really have more opportunity to understand how the things that we vote in and implement, how are they working? How effective are they? Are they having any growing pains? What are people's experiences with the different educational services they're delivering at a school-based level? And so, um, in putting an advisory board together, it's really trying to elevate what currently is happening, maybe where I talk to teachers, maybe you talk to some teachers, maybe we talk to a few administrators, maybe we talk to some social workers, or maybe occasionally you talk to a special ed person. And it's trying to take that anecdotal information that you're getting, insightful though it is, and trying to make it more robust by creating a slightly better structure around it. And so um, the idea would be that um, in a more structured way, um, there can be richer understanding of how the educational processes are functioning, how they're being impacted by the staff, maybe some of their ideas for improvement, or just understanding more how the decisions that we make impact what happens at a school-based level. And the advantages are shown here on this the first that on that summary slide, right? Um, but the number one is just better informed decision making and really better communications and us being better aligned to understanding what we're doing and how it impacts the what's happening in the classroom. And I think in terms of on our committees, I like to think that it would help us to understand what should we be working on and what should we be focusing on areas to improve. Um, um, and so so I'm going to just give a couple examples. Like for me, I didn't I didn't understand how to start talking to um, some of the shared staff in school, for instance. Um, Shared staff may be like social workers, um, other specialists within the school setting, right? That share between grades. That some social workers within Harvard Public Schools have fairly they have a high number of cases. I didn't know how many cases the average social worker had in Hartford. And so I started talking to them. And um, it didn't distress me until I just started realizing when they were talking to their peers in other districts, their peers in other districts had significantly smaller caseloads. And it began to flag me as like, caseload could be a factor impacting, staff satisfaction and their decision whether to stay in the district. Now, the person that I was talking to has since left the district because as soon as I saw that, oh, her her colleague had a third of the workload she had, I knew that she wasn't going to be long for the district at some point. And I think in the article that you guys read about that, um, the student that had issues reading, I noticed that one of the bylines from that article is one of that social work staff also left at some point with a high workload. And so what that informed me on maybe is the idea that at a board level, maybe we begin to create really like factors of what are real indicators that may be an indicator of staff health in certain areas. And so to me, let's say, for instance, in areas of social work and other specialty areas like that, their caseload may be a factor that we want to track and understand and see how our work, how the caseload of our staff compares to other districts, or maybe things we can do about it, or other things we can do to help balance the workload of these staff that have high workloads. In addition to that, there was a circumstance where some staff felt a little bit what was impacting their even with the high workload, what was maybe impacting their ability to feel like they were really making a difference is in some situations, staff had other tasks they had to do. So I may be, again, a social worker, or I may be a resource person, or I may be a speaking language pathologist or a special ed person, but sometimes they had to do bus duty or lunch duty or cover for someone's class. And to me, if you're a shared resource or resource like a special ed person or a social work person who is, we got shortages of those people. Their greatest benefit is being able to do the thing that they really are focused on doing, right? Like serving students and serving the people in that caseload. And so again, I didn't know this other than by talking with staff, understanding what's happening with them. And again, it made me feel like, oh, okay, maybe that should be another thing that we put onto our working list of what factors should we be looking at in our committees. Again, are there ways to adjust, that kind of in-school experience of certain staff? Maybe some staff should be exempted from the lunch duty or from bus duty or from some tasks and activities that are administrative in nature, because their real high value to us is really serving the students in a very case management capacity, right? And I don't have the answers here, but to me, that inside information I only got from really talking to staff and really engaging in back and forth with understanding what's happening to staff as they're actually trying to deliver these education services, and beginning to get some insight as to do these experiences, are they widespread? Does it actually have any impact on their ability to stay or not stay? I think what I'm saying here is by in this conversation, it began to inform me as different issues and concerns that I should be maybe looking at a committee level, at a board level, and talk to a school leadership about to say, should this be on our radar screen? Can we do something to move the needle in this area? And could it impact the lives of teachers in a way that would make them just stay here longer, right? And there are a couple of examples I have as well, but I wanted to use that to begin to say that and talking with teachers, it's not about necessarily trying to get them to try to do our jobs. It's that a lot of cases, the jobs that we do can become better informed if we understand better how what we're deciding impacts what happens at the school level. Like this past July, for instance, we voted $3 to $5 million for speech and language pathologists outplacement, right? Those outsourced speech and language pathologists. We got to have them. I mean, because we didn't have enough speech and language pathologists. What I had no idea though is how these online speech and language pathologists may work within a school setting, right? I had no idea particularly that because they're online, the students, like local school-based staff, still need to accompany students and kind of maybe even sit there with students as they're going through this instruction. I didn't know that extra cost was being borne by the school-based staff, even though we have this online speech language pathologist. I didn't realize in some cases the online person doesn't have all the skill sets, right? And working with school technology. And so in these situations, that resource that we were voting for and is to help the school doesn't provide as much benefit in some ways as we would imagine and think.
Tyrone, can I jump in really quick?
Yes.
I think we understand I guess the case you're making for it. Can you briefly describe how you think that this would weave in? Like, is it a standalone committee? Just briefly describe how you think it will kind of weave into what we're currently doing on a day-to-day as a board. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I think we can make some determinations there. Right now, we have existing committee meetings set up, right? So one alternative would be to incorporate an advisory committee, a advisory board or committee within your existing meetings, right? Within maybe teaching and learning or family community engagement. The other approach would be maybe in a setting like this. I hadn't worked out exactly how I would envision it, at least as I've experienced it. It would be beneficial within almost like a workshop type setting, where you're dealing with a topic and you're wanting to have some rich exchange about a particular topic area and talking about it. And so where it's worked for me is in a situation where I could actually ask questions, and get some feedback and response, maybe focus on a particular area of concern and really have that kind of dialogue take place. So I would say at the very least, something akin to kind of like a workshop type meetings, or maybe a committee as a whole like this, where we're dealing with a couple of topics and that the advisory group could provide feedback on those topics of concern. As it relates to like standing committees, I think it would need to be more selective. To me, the value is where you would feel like instructional staff feedback would make would be of some benefit. And so to me, that would be more on a case by case basis as you go through your actual standing committees. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Thank you. So Mr. Walker, do you want questions now from board members, or do we
Yeah,
want to?
I mean, I think I drew enough of a picture just to, I just wanted to draw a picture of how I thought the feedback from an advisory committee would be useful, right?
Okay, so then I will
Yeah.
open it up for questions, and then we can have, so I think after questions, then I would encourage everyone to read the information, and for the viewing public, the information is available in board docs. And then, so we can have questions now, and then we'll go into further discussion at the policy committee in February, if that works for you. Okay. All right. Any questions from board members? Mr. Tatum?
Just a quick question about the policy regarding committee members. If one of the ideas is that like members of a teacher advisory council could be incorporated into our existing committee structure, what is our policy about like who are members of our existing committees and who is invited to those meetings? I guess
That's me. Well, I, in my view, I mean, an advisory board is an advisory board. They wouldn't become members of a committee, but like committee meetings are open to the public. And so, if you have advisory members, I may invite them to listen in and to hear what's being talked about at a committee level. And in some cases, they may have an opinion about it. They may have experiences that they have that may have some bearing on, what's being presented. But that to me would be something that would be on a case-by-case basis, as people who run committees may see there's topics of that would be of interest, or where you would think instructional staff would have some kind of input that may have some bearing on an issue or topic.
One thing, if I may, really quick, I was talking to Ms. Santiago today, and we were talking about public comment is allowed in committee meetings. So adding that public comment section into the meetings might also help with some of this, if we move forward or not, it is still an option for us to add to the end of committees, which might be really helpful. I think is the one thing that I think at least personally for me as a board member, when we go to vote on something and then somebody stands up that evening for public comment, I'm like, I had no idea. Like now do we process that? How do we process that? So hearing those things, I think, and to your point, Mr. Tatum, about having folks be able to voice that, I think at a committee meeting would be helpful. So, but back to you.
yeah, and I think it is Christina in the chat has just clarified that board members are the only members of the committee, and other people who participate in those committee meetings are invited in, presumably by the chair of that committee in collaboration with like whoever is planning that meeting. And so when district staff, for example, are present at committee meetings to share information, it's not that they're members of that committee, it's that they've been invited by the chair of that committee to engage in the discussion that evening. And so I guess part of what I'm trying to wrap my head around is like how much policy revision or what particular policy revisions do we need to go down a route like this, and what could be done to achieve some of the goals of this within our existing policies. And I'm not trying to, suggest that there's a different route than what Mr. Walker is proposing. I'm just trying to understand the different sort of pathways and options, as you asked Chair Hockenhall about like how does like we get the purpose that this is trying to achieve, but how does it actually incorporate with what we're doing? And I think I'm clear on that now. So thanks.
Ms. Brody? Board Member Brody?
I could not get off of mute. I'm so sorry. So I think I had an idea of this idea with previous conversations with Mr. Walker, but now as a result of tonight, I'm a little bit confused. Or like, so you're saying this advisory committee would advise on all committees?
No, no. The advisory, this advisory group, how we deem them, right? They're advising us as board members. And so what I was saying, Board Member Brody, is as board members, we would use their advice where we would find it useful. Like I had
But
suggested.
how does that happen? Per topic? I'm trying to
Well,
make it.
that's okay. That's why I'd said, like, for me, I'd envision one concept around, let's say, for instance, in areas of workshop. Like, for instance, if we want to understand more of what's happening with our SPED staff and what are their experiences at school bases and stuff like that, we could have a session talking about SPED and talking with our advisory group about their experiences from a special ed standpoint, and get practitioners or stakeholders in that space and have a discussion with them in that area. Now, alternately, there may be a topic as a board member. A couple years ago, we had a topic around online tutoring, right? And that may be a topic in which I may want to ask my advisory group, hey, what do you guys think about online tutoring, and get their feedback on it. But that's because I have that particular, I have that question or concern. So it would be on board members, the board, how we want to utilize this advisory group, right? I think board Chair Hockenhall brought the clarifying point that they're not members of the board, and they're not trying to be members of the board. They're trying to provide some input to board members. So
No, that's not my
okay,
perception nor my question.
okay,
I'm asking, I can't understand the concept,
Mhm.
like, because who's managing all of this? Because if we're looking for an advisory council is it just advising? Is it a standing committee and we're going to them? Is it like a monthly? I am confused. I understood it better with conversations with you
yes.
than now, because I guess you have to really talk about the meat of it and how it's going to work in, but concept wise and how it would work, I am totally confused. Because you're saying some subjects, like say if for years, right, we've been talking about the fact that we have public comment per our bylaws. It could be anyone could attend our committees, they could ask a question, but we've never utilized that as what was just the previous question and discussion before my question.
Mhm.
So how would it be so different from that? Because I'm not getting a clear concept on is advising and how and when, and I just don't get it. I'm sorry. And I'm trying to.
Well, I appreciate what you're saying. And so Board Member Brody, the reason I'm being somewhat open-ended is ultimately if the board member, if and I hope you do, agree to adopt this process, as a board, we need to hammer out in detail how it would work for us. I can I can draw a couple pictures, but actually, as membership, we would actually have to hammer out exactly how we want it to work for us. Now, as it relates to the public comment, um, I definitely see, as I've experienced public comment, um, like public comment is a little limited because it tends to be a one-sided conversation. Someone making a comment and then kind of walking off. I think what I'm suggesting within an advisory situation, um, there's there is excuse me, here we go. There would be some back and forth, some questions and responses, so that there's some depth of understanding. And
Have you ever experienced um the public comment in a committee?
I have not. I heard that tonight.
So
I was like,
it's not as you described. It is. This is the last thing I'll say because I don't want to hog the time, right? But
mhm,
when we had committees in person, particularly the family and community engagement, and it was the school building, it was all in one committee.
mhm,
And I know this because I was a regular parent attending that committee monthly, faithfully
mhm,
for years. So we got a chance to we weren't voting on the committee, but we were there, we were present, we had our concerns as parents. The board members heard us if they needed follow-up with us. So that's what public comment in committee has been traditionally. That's my experience with the community being invited, or anyone being invited into that's our space, right? But I guess I would do have a question though. How does the other committees, how do they work? Like, because we have a teacher, other like type of advisory sort of committee. I don't know. I don't attend those meetings. So all of those committees that are with committees with students, committees with a parent advisory committee, and a teacher advisory committee, how does all of that work together, and how does that have equity in our doing business and being advised by others that are not board members?
uh,
Like, we have to think through all of those things. So I guess that is my question.
no,
There is yeah, I want to understand.
no. I think you, then Board Member Brody, I think you've drew the bigger vision I would have. What the discourse you talked about having at the committee level is one that I would envision happening, occurring too, where there would be people who would be more generally connected with a body, and and also I don't see it ending with teachers. Teachers are just one group. To me, if you're talking about advisory, it would feel like to me eventually parents will be part of that, as well as other stakeholders in that area. Because to me, all the voices have merit, right? Um, Teachers are just because of my own personal experience, but I wouldn't see it limited it to just teachers. I totally agree with you that um, there's value in talking to a range of the stakeholders within our educational community. And I will maybe talk to you offline about your experience in committee prior to my time on the board. But what you described is something that I think would be uh, a model that I would embrace. The one you talked about where there was back and forth between standing participants at a committee level.
There. Okay, thank you.
Ms. Darrell Ledger?
Thank you. Good evening. Can you hear me? Okay. I apologize. I'm in a place where there are kids. So I wanted to say first, and thank you for your presentation, Board Member Walker. I wanted to clarify something with regards to what Board Member Tatum said about individuals who are not board members who come to the committee meetings who are invited. So those individuals are invited because they're either presenting on contracts that we have to vote on at some particular point in the near future, upcoming future, or they are individuals who specialize in an area of, of a topic on the agenda that we're going to be discussing. So that's why they're there. The concern that I have, or the question rather, is with regards to having a teacher advisory committee. So this would be in addition to PTA or PTO that teachers are encouraged and invited to join within, in their schools. There's also governance council that teachers are invited to whether run for or, seek a position in that so that they can have a voice for in decisions that are made in their school building. In addition to having the union president who and union rep who they can go to if they have concerns or things that are perhaps bothering them. And there's also a district teacher advisory group, principal advisory group, and a caregiver parent advisory group. So what I'm wondering is where would there be, not so much where would there be time, but are all of these groups and these avenues being utilized and exercised and taken advantage of, and to the point, I don't want to say to the point of exhaustion, but are they being tapped into before we add another advisory group? That's a question that I have. And also, another part to the question is, should we have this teacher advisory group? How will that will also probably add more time to the already rigorous schedule that the teachers already have. So are we factoring, or are you, Mr. Board Member Walker, factoring this in? And what are your, if you can answer those questions?
Yeah, I understand. I want to separate up, and Board Member Darrell Ledger, and that's a good question because I think you've raised a similar comment before. There are these vehicles for which teachers can get involved at their school level or within their school-based community, and I'm not taking away from any of that. And I'm not saying that I, as a board member, wouldn't plug into it. What I'm suggesting is, as a board, we ourselves can benefit from advice. And so the advisory group for the board would be another volunteer group. As far as I know, there's no shortage of teachers or instructional staff who would like to be, heard or want to participate in this type of process, periodically. I mean, I I don't envision this being something that um, you're meeting every week and stuff like that. And the purpose is to provide feedback to us, right? To inform the school board members, to help the school board members understand better what's happening within, the world of educational services and instructional staff. And so um, I see this advisory group is having a very, very specific benefit as relates to us. Um, I do agree that it would still be helpful potentially for board members to plug into um, the PTO, the SGC, um, to see its help and to understand what's happening at different schools. If, but to me, in some ways, because we have so many schools, we have so many SGCs and so many PTOs, I'm occasionally it becomes overwhelming to try to plug into all the schools and all the PTOs and all the different governance councils. Um, I was seeking a way to create a group that would could help us as we're looking at issues around the district, issues amongst and across different schools and things like that. And kind of to the point that remember Brody brought up, I kind of would also like a group that would kind of in some ways persist and be around for a while, where you can build a certain amount of relationship with. And it's not just a one-off and people walk away, but a certain amount of um, you know, continue dialogue and communication with sets of instructional staff or educators to help um, provide advice as needed for the board.
Thank you so much for that clarification. However, I forgot to mention that we also have our office hours that take place so that teachers are able to freely come and speak to us. But one concern that I have is us getting in the weeds of, as board members, and getting, because we have committees, we have the teaching and learning committee, we have, the finance committee, we have all of those different committees, policy committee, and so on and so forth. And teachers are, as a teacher myself, and as a parent, there are opportunities to voice, opinions and concerns, and also praises as well, the glows and the grows. So my concern is that, we start to kind of dismantle, if you will, certain systems that are put in place so that teachers are able to utilize those systems.
Yeah, Board Member Dasher Ludger, that's good feedback. I don't anticipate this advisory committee in its relationship getting into the weeds. I think we have to be mindful of it, though. I'm not going down every kind of rabbit hole. That's why in examples I was sharing, one has got us, it's about giving advice to the board members and things that we're concerned with. We're not trying to fix and solve every management issue. So certain things that I may hear, but not necessarily respond to or try to address and deal with. But I think the one thing you did mention about the community, those community hours, that would be like another kind of vehicle for which you could engage in exchange with parents or teachers, and you could potentially engage with that kind of group in that kind of setting, where there could be some back and forth and some exchange. And so, yeah, I do see the community hours as being one of the places where this kind of group could be beneficial.
So this kind of group, help me, can you please repeat that?
I'm sorry. Yeah, I was saying, you mentioned community hours, and I was thinking, board member Darcel Ledger, that community hours could be a place where you could engage like advisory group of teachers or parents in um, in a back and forth exchange on, you know, an areas of concern, and so I've just lifting that up to you as um, a place and space where that this group could be beneficial.
Okay, thank you.
Um, Chair, I saw one comment, I think from board member Brody, um, about how this will be managed, and um, that's not worked out. That's why this has to go through policy committee to work out the actual details of how something like this would actually function. So, you know, everything hasn't been laid flat. But thanks for that question.
Thanks, Mr. Walker, for your presentation. And I would encourage board members to read the information that has been shared with us. I believe, Mr. Walker, you sent us an email as well with additional information in it. So before we get to the policy committee in February, just encourage you all to make sure that we're all at least understand what the request is before us, and then we will further discuss this in February. Thank you so much. And, oh, Ms. Brody?
So we're going to be in policy committee writing a policy, like starting to you know, change our policy to include this. Where are we on that process?
It's my understanding that to form this committee or advisory council, it would be something that would be a change in our bylaws based on information that was shared back when this was brought up with the last board. So that's why we thought policy committee was the next place to take it. That makes sense.
Yeah, to change the how do we get to a clear understanding of tonight? Because I'm leaving with more questions than I came in with.
Yeah, I think that's why we're going to talk for, like, so tonight's not the only night we'll talk about it. We'll continue to discuss it in the policy committee. We just wanted another place to talk about it since tonight was committee of the whole. We brought it forward to everyone, but we'll continue to have additional conversations. So before we do change any bylaws or have any discussions about like the actual changing, you're right, we do need to kind of answer the questions that are currently outstanding.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Hello?
Ms. Darcel.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to say that with it, with all of this, I'm hoping, and all I really want is for, I would love for teachers to have, to feel free to voice their concerns, like I said, voice their glows, their grows. But I want to make sure that the avenues that we, and the systems that we already have in place are being utilized. And if they're not effective, then perhaps we need to revisit those. And I'm talking about PTO, PTA, governance, school governance council, the community, whether they're town halls, the office hours, all of that. Perhaps we need to look at those and see if they're not, if they're not being utilized, perhaps why not? And maybe a survey needs to go out.
Thank you. Again, thank you for participation. That was really helpful, and look forward to further conversations on that. With that, I believe we're going to enter into executive session 2.1. Before we enter, we will be taking into executive session Ms. Christina Santiago, and I believe Superintendent Charles Rodriguez, our your plan is to join us as well, I assume. Great. So with that, can I have a motion to enter executive session?
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor?
Before
Aye.
before we
Before we
do,
vote.
could we clarify? I see Ms. Santiago
Oh.
put in the chat that it might just be her entering executive session. Could we just clarify that before we make the vote?
Oh,
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Yes, I'm sorry. So who is entering an executive session with us? Just
Miss
Ms.
Sa-
Santiago?
I don't have to if you don't need me to.
I was gonna say, Ms. Hockenhall, I didn't immediately see a role for the superintendent on this
Yeah.
particular.
Okay,
It's just me.
All right.
Christina. Yeah.
all right, just Ms. Santiago then. My apologies for the confusion. Okay. Okay, and just as a reminder, this is for discussion and deliberation around filling the vacancy on the board, the elected vacancy position on the Board of Education. So with that, we'll do it again. Motion to enter an executive session.
So moved.
Thank you. Second. Thank you. All those in favor? Aye.
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 Oh, opposed? Abstained? All right, we will now enter executive session. Thank you, everyone. And there will be no votes when we come out or anything like that. So thank you all for joining tonight. Good night.